Welcome back. In our last video, we learned the basics of pixels, the basics of functions, and how our functions affect particular pixel locations. And we drew a face. Now we're going to up it a little bit, and we're going to draw shapes and fill those shapes with colors. So let's do this. Let's complicate things a little further, shall we? All right, let's go File, Save As. Let's call this 2A Shapes. And let's make a canvas a little bit bigger this time of 800 by 600. And now let's draw an ellipse. An ellipse needs 4 arguments. It needs the X and Y location of its center, and then its width and its height. So I'm going to put it directly in the center of the screen, which is at 400, 300, and I'll give it a width of 200 and a height of 100, and let's do it. Okay, so yay, I drew an ellipse in the center, and it's 200 pixels wide, 100 pixels tall. So it's like a diameter, an X diameter and a Y diameter, so to say. And of course, if you make both of these numbers the same, you'll never guess what happens. You get a circle. All right, so good stuff. Now, a rectangle. Let's do a rectangle next. So a rectangle takes 4 arguments, but it does it according to its top left corner. So if I say 400, 300, and let's give it the same dimensions, same width, and let's go 200, 100. Okay. And let's run it. So take a look at this. My rectangle begins in the center of our canvas, and it has a width of 200 and a height, counts from 100 on down. So keep this in mind, that a rectangle and ellipse are drawn slightly different. And guess what? I remembered this time. File, save. Let's add some color to this. All right, let's add some colors. So let's go to File, Save As. I'm going to call this 2B Colors. And the way to add color, let's start with Grayscale, is by using the function fill. And we're going to start with fill 0. So fill 0 turns our shapes completely black, whereas the maximum whiteness of fill goes up to 255. So that's pure white. And anywhere in between is a level of grayscale. So if I go with like fill of 100, well, that's 100 out of 255 on the whiteness scale, which is a darker gray. Notice that the fill applies automatically to both shapes, because once you specify a fill, it applies to every single line of code underneath it. So if I put fill, I'll make this, 200. And boom. There you go. Now I have 2 different color shapes. This also brings up another important point. Lines of code are executed one at a time from top to bottom. So the last line of code is executed last, which means that shape appears on top. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to take all this out. I'm going to Control Exit out of here, and I'll put it underneath Control V. Now look what happens. Now the ellipse is on top of our rectangle. Keep this in mind. This is important in your upcoming assignment, and you have to understand this for bugs that are going to show up in your future codes. Okay, so let's keep going. So that's how to do grayscale, but there's also, RGB. Let's do full-on different colors. So the RGB system is, red, green, and blue, each one specified at 255 different levels. So if I go 255, 0, 0, that is going to make a red rectangle underneath, right? And so if I go, let's go 0, 255, 0. Now I have a green circle, perfectly green circle on top of a red rectangle. Now we can also, and pure 255 here would be pure blue, but you guys get that? So let's mix green and blue. Does anybody know what color that makes? That makes cyan, which is weird. But I guess a better way to call it is it's blue-green, which is what it is. It's blue and green. Interesting little factoid here. 255 full red, 255 and green 255 makes the official color of Pac-Man. This is Pac-Man's color. He's as yellow can be. Pretty cool. Same thing goes for Mrs. Pac-Man. All right, so that's how to do colors. And again, notice the fill only applies to the object below it. Okay, now we can also change the color and the thickness of the border. So the way I change the thickness of the border is I'm going to put the word stroke weight above it. And this is something else that's typical in programming. This is called camelback. That when you have two words that are combined in one word, you capitalize the first letter of the second word, or the third letter, or the fourth letter. So stroke weight, let's change this to stroke weight of 10. And there you go. I've made a 10 pixel border around both of my shapes. Now I can also change the actual color of the outline by changing the stroke function. So let's make a, I don't know, 255, let's make purple. Purple borders. Yay, purple borders around our shapes. Now, if I want to get rid of the border outright, I could go stroke 0, but that runs into some trouble. Better way to do it is the command no stroke. And by the way, one little thing here, notice you still need a set of parentheses. You just don't put an argument in it. And let's run that. And so there we go. My yellow ellipse does not, or my circle, does not have a border around it. Hope that makes sense. All right, now let's complicate things a little further. File save, I remembered again, I'm so happy. All right, file save, and now let's add a little bit of complexity, transparency, and some modifiers. All right, let's save the previous code, file save, and we're going to save this new one as 2C modifiers. Okay, first modifier I'm going to go over is changing the transparency. So the transparency, which is also called the alpha channel, I like calling it opacity personally, also has a scale of 0 to 255. So where 0 is maximum transparency, 255 is maximum opacity. So let's do it here. I'm going to change the fill of our rectangle to be 100. And take a look. You see how the rectangle is kind of like salmonish or pinkish, I want to call it? I don't know. We'll call that salmon. Let's do the same thing with our yellow circle. So I'll give it a transparency, but this time I'll make it really transparent. Very low opacity of 50. And there you go. You can see it almost looks like the ellipse is behind it. But it isn't. It's just that it's so transparent, it's messing with your eyeballs. So there you go. We've changed the level of opacity. Here's another modifier. And this is a big one. I like using it a lot. I said earlier that rectangle is drawn specified on its top left corner. We can change that to be specified by the location of its center. So the way you do that is you use rect mode in Camelback center. And now watch what happens. You see how the rectangle and the ellipse perfectly line up? Because now, once rect mode center, the modifier, is above rectangle, it's going to draw it on the basis of its center. The first two arguments now specify 400 and 300, now specify the location of the center of our rectangle. Okay, one last thing I want to bring to the table is you can also change the color of your background. We haven't done that yet. And so I'm just going to make a white background. Same colors of RGB rules apply here. And there we go. Now we have a white background. All right, save right now. Yay, I remembered again. Okay, so now let's go to your assignment. Your assignment is as follows. I want you on a perfectly black canvas to draw a white circle that fills up the entire canvas, at least the height. And I want a blue ellipse with a cyan border and a purple square on top of it. And notice that the square perfectly cuts off the edges of your ellipse. And again, this is about the details. I want you to think about this carefully. That's super important because this is going to prepare you for harder things, especially in game design where hitboxes, if you can't keep track of your pixel locations, good luck coding a hitbox. It is not going to happen. All right, Answer shortly. All right, it's answer time. So save the last one and let's make a new one entirely. I'm going to do this from scratch. And I'll call this, let's call this 2D test. The test of our final stuff of our second video. Okay, let's do this from scratch. So size 800 by 600. And we're just going to run that just to show we're all working. And yeah, there's our canvas. Okay, we want a black canvas though. So we're going to go background 0, run that just to show it. All right, you get the idea. Now let's get a white ellipse in there. So that's a fill of 255 going into our ellipse. Let's make a separation so I don't confuse this with that. I'm going to group things together. And so we're going to go ellipse, and I want it in the center. And the center of our canvas is going to be located at 400, 300. But I want it to fill the entire height. And the entire height is 600 pixels. So I need the width to be the same as the height. So that's going to be 600 by 600. And there you go. Okay, now it's time for our blue circle on top. So let's see. So that's going to be fill of 0, 0, 255. And that's going to be an ellipse, and it's located a little bit further up. I know it's in the center, so 400. I'm going to guess it's at about 200 pixels. And let's see, let's guess 200 by 200 pixels for the size of it. That's a little small. So let's change this to 300, 300. Let's try that out. There we go. Now, got to change the border. Notice it's a thicker border. That's cyan. So as long as it's above this ellipse, it's going to modify it. So we're going to say stroke weight, and that's going to be, I guess, 10 pixels. And this fill needs to be above this, and then I need to make a fill or a, no, that actually doesn't matter. So stroke weight, and then we're going to go stroke of cyan. So that's 0, 255, 255. Let's try that out. There we go. Okay, now last thing. I need a purple rectangle on top. So I'm going to group these all here. So that's going to be, purple is 255, 0, 255. And I'm going to cheat and use rect mode center because that's going to make my life a lot easier. And I know I want it centered horizontally at least. So we're going to go with rect. And horizontally is going to be at 400. I'll put it at 400 pixels. And let's make it 300 by 300 to match it up. Let's see if that works. Looks pretty good. It looks like I got to shift it up a little bit though. So let's shift it up by 50 pixels and see if that lines up. Yeah, there we go. Now, let's get rid of the border here. Remember, the way to do that is no stroke. Try that out. Two things. I need to create a little bit of transparency here. And so I'll guess a transparency of 100. A little bit more. Let's go like 150. That's not too important. I just wanted you all to think about how to use transparency. Last little thing. So I wanted to illustrate this point as well. Notice that it doesn't fill it up entirely, because the border eats up half of the pixels going out and half of the pixels going in. So let's add just a little bit of thickness to our rectangle, a little bit of size. There you go. So I think I've matched it up perfectly. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so there you are. That's the end of this for the basics. So now you know how to draw shapes and fill those shapes with colors. Next lesson, you're going to move on to taking keyboard and mouse inputs. So you're going to create an interactive program at your third lesson. So keep it going. Hope you're all kicking butt.